know that part of the deal was you had to have sex with this guy?
I didn't know at first what was going to happen, especially that first night, because
Hugh Hefner died in 2017, but the secrets hidden in his mansion's basement continued to haunt people long after his death. For decades, hidden cameras had been recording guests without their knowledge, starting in the late 1970s. Former girlfriends later revealed that the basement contained mountains of adult content that Hefner used to control and manipulate people. In one vault, investigators found FBI files showing the government had been watching him for years. By 2022, more than 10 lawsuits had emerged from victims who discovered they had been secretly recorded. The basement wasn't just hiding wild parties. It was hiding crimes that would leave a permanent scar on Hollywood. Hugh Marin Hefner was born on April 9, 1926, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were strict Methodists who didn't believe in showing affection, watching movies, or discussing anything related to sex. This cold and rule-filled household shaped him in ways no one could have predicted. Even as a child, he would secretly draw pictures of half-dressed women, showing that something inside him was already rebelling against the strict walls his family had built around him. He later said that the lack of warmth in his family made him desperately crave both emotional and physical freedom. His entire life seemed to become a reaction against that early, harsh treatment. Despite having a high IQ of 152, Hefner's school grades were only average. He didn't excel in traditional classroom settings, but his imagination was extraordinary. At elementary school, he began writing comic books, where he portrayed himself as the hero in daring adventures. When he was 16, a girl named Betty broke his heart so severely that he completely reinvented himself. He started calling himself Hef, changed how he dressed, and began writing a comic about his school life called School Days. This happened in 1942 and marked one of the first times he transformed personal pain into something creative. At Steinmetz High School, Hefner kept pushing forward with his creative pursuits. In 1943, he started the school newspaper called the Steinmetz Trumpet, serving as both cartoonist and reporter while blending words with images and making people laugh. He also sang in the school band and joined the student council, never stopping his performances and creative work. The heartbreak from Betty never truly left him, but instead of destroying him, it pushed him to work even harder on his creative projects, especially his comic series, where he placed himself into wild and exciting stories. After graduating in early 1944, Hefner's connection to his high school remained strong throughout his life. Decades later, in 2010, he began donating $7,500 every year to help the school's newspaper print in color. Even at age 84, he still remembered those formative years vividly. In 2016, when there was a censorship dispute at the school, he stepped in again to renew his support and protect student voices, showing that his commitment to free expression had deep roots in his teenage experiences. In June 1944, Hefner joined the Army and trained at Fort Hood in Texas, where he earned a sharpshooter badge with his M1 rifle. However, he never saw combat on the front lines. Thanks to his excellent typing skills, he was assigned to a comfortable desk job in Maryland, which he called a lucky break. Instead of fighting overseas, he spent his time chasing women around Washington and drawing cartoons for military newsletters. He served until 1946, and later said those quiet years helped keep his creative flame alive. He believed that if he had experienced the trauma of combat, Playboy magazine might never have been created. After leaving the Army, Hefner enrolled at the University of Illinois in 1946, studying psychology with minors in creative writing and art. He worked so intensely that he managed to complete all his coursework in just 2.5 years. During this time, he became editor of the campus humor magazine called Shaft and introduced a controversial new section called Co-Ed of the Month. This feature shocked many people, but clearly hinted at the type of content he would later become famous for creating. He briefly attended Northwestern for graduate school in 1949, but dropped out after writing a paper that criticized America's restrictive sex laws, showing his desire to challenge social norms rather than follow established rules. In 1952, Hefner was working at Esquire magazine for $60 per week. When he asked for a small raise of just $5, his bosses refused, so he made the bold decision to quit immediately. This rejection became the catalyst for his own magazine empire. He borrowed $600 by mortgaging his furniture and raised another $8,000 from 45 different investors, including $1,000 from his mother, who didn't believe in his project but loved him enough to help anyway. He initially wanted to name his magazine Stag Party, but had to change it due to legal threats from another publication, leading him to come up with the name Playboy instead. The first issue of Playboy was assembled entirely in Hefner's small Hyde Park kitchen. When the inaugural issue came out in December 1953, it didn't even have a date printed on the cover because Hefner wasn't confident there would ever be a second issue. The centerpiece was nude photos of Marilyn Monroe that he had purchased for just $500. These photos had actually been taken in 1949, long before Monroe became a major movie star. Monroe never worked directly with Playboy or even met Hefner personally, but her image lying on red velvet with eyes closed and lips slightly parted became one of the most iconic magazine photos of all time. The first issue sold nearly 54,000 copies at 50 cents each, which was a remarkable success for an unknown publication. Alongside Monroe's photos, Hefner included articles about jazz music, sports coverage, and even a Sherlock Holmes story. This combination was his way of proving that the magazine was designed to stimulate both the mind and the eyes, not just provide sexual content. Today, original copies of that first issue can sell for more than $100,000 at auctions, showing how historically significant it became. Hefner wrote the very first editorial himself, explaining that the magazine would provide entertainment for men through fiction, fashion, music, and beautiful women. It didn't take long for major writers to contribute to the magazine. Ray Bradbury published stories, and in 1955, Hefner shocked conservative readers by printing Charles Beaumont's science fiction story about a world where heterosexuals were discriminated against, essentially flipping real-world oppression upside down. The story caused tremendous outrage, but Hefner stood firmly behind his decision to publish it, demonstrating his commitment to controversial and thought-provoking content. That same year, Hefner hired Dick Gregory, a black comedian he had seen perform in Chicago clubs. This gave Gregory his first major break in show business, and the magazine was selling 100,000 copies monthly by then. However, Hefner's battles with censorship were just beginning. In 1955, the U.S. Postal Service attempted to ban Playboy completely, declaring it obscene and unfit for distribution through the mail. Hefner fought back legally and won the case, which allowed him to print in full color and expand his distribution rapidly across the country. Even established literary figures eventually contributed to Playboy. Writers like Vladimir Nabokov and musician John Lennon provided content for the magazine in later years. In 1963, Hefner was arrested over photos of actress Jane Mansfield, but the criminal case ended with a hung jury allowing him to continue publishing. He also expanded into television with a show called Playboy's Penthouse in 1959, which was filmed to look like a sophisticated party at his apartment and featured major stars like Sammy Davis Jr. and Ella Fitzgerald performing together. The television show pushed important racial boundaries by showing black and white guests socializing together on screen during an era when many stations in the South refused to air such integrated programming. In 1960, Hefner opened the first Playboy Club in Chicago, which was immediately packed with visitors who paid for special keyholder memberships just to gain entry. The waitresses wore distinctive satin costumes with bunny ears and tails, but behind the glamorous appearance, strict rules forced them to maintain certain weights and appearances or face punishment and possible termination. By 1961, the Chicago club had welcomed over 132,000 visitors in just 3 months, proving the concept's massive popularity. Eventually, there were 40 Playboy clubs operating around the world, including locations in London and Jamaica. In 1962, Hefner began writing an extensive series of essays called The Playboy Philosophy, which ran until 1965 and totaled approximately 250,000 words. In these essays, he discussed controversial topics like free speech, abortion rights, and America's restrictive sex laws, positioning himself as a progressive social thinker. While some people viewed him as a brave intellectual fighting for personal freedom, others, especially feminist groups, argued that he was simply using sophisticated language to justify the exploitation of women. Protests began appearing outside Playboy events, and former employees later revealed that women working for Hefner had to follow strict and often demeaning rules that controlled their appearance, behavior, and personal lives. These revelations showed that hidden abuse was already occurring behind the glamorous public image. By 1964, Playboy went public on the stock, Kia market, and was valued at $120 million, though Hefner retained controlling interest in the company. In December 1959, he had purchased a massive 70-room mansion in Chicago for $370,000. This became the original Playboy Mansion, complete with secret tunnels, a swimming pool with waterfall entrances, and rooms filled with mirrors and special lighting effects. After his divorce, Hefner lived there full-time and hosted wild parties with hundreds of guests, while FBI agents maintained surveillance during ongoing obscenity investigations. Years later, numerous women came forward with disturbing allegations, claiming they had been drugged against their will, forced into sexual acts, and secretly filmed without their consent. Some of these serious accusations were included in documentaries that aired as late as 2022, long after Hefner's death. In 1968, Hefner started Playboy Productions to make movies, with one of the first major films being Macbeth in 1971, directed by Roman Polanski. This dark and violent adaptation gained attention partly because Polanski had recently lost his wife, Sharon Tate, in the infamous Manson family murders. The movie production company eventually made more than 20 films, including Saint Jack in 1979. But behind the scenes, the Playboy empire was experiencing serious problems. While the Playboy name appeared everywhere and seemed successful, increasingly dark stories kept emerging about what was really happening behind closed doors at the mansion and other Playboy properties around the world. Hefner's personal relationships were equally complex and troubled. He married Mildred Williams in 1949 after they met at Northwestern University. Hefner had saved himself for marriage, believing she was his true love, but while he was serving in the Army, Mildred confessed to having an affair with another man. This betrayal completely shattered him emotionally, and he later described it as the most painful experience of his entire life. Out of guilt over her infidelity, Mildred allowed him to sleep with other women, but this arrangement couldn't save their deteriorating marriage. By 1959, they divorced after 10 years together, and they had 2 children during their marriage: Christy, born in 1952, and David, born in 1955. After the divorce, Hugh underwent a dramatic personality change. He threw himself into an extremely wild lifestyle at the Chicago Playboy Mansion, dating multiple women simultaneously, and eventually claiming he had been intimate with more than 1,000 different women throughout his life. Their children initially took their mother's new husband's last name, but later changed it back to Hefner. This period marked the true beginning of the hedonistic lifestyle that would make Hefner internationally famous. Lavish parties every night, relationships with numerous young women, and creating a fantasy world where normal social rules didn't seem to apply. In 1968, everything shifted dramatically when Hefner met Barbie Benton, who was only 18 years old when she appeared on his television show, Playboy After Dark. Their relationship developed quickly, and she moved into the mansion with him. By 1971, Benton had convinced Hefner to purchase an enormous mansion in the Hollywood Hills for just over $1 million. That same year, he completely transformed this estate into the new and more famous Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles. The property featured its own private zoo, multiple waterfalls, secret rooms throughout the house, and the legendary grotto where wild parties took place almost every single night. Major celebrities like Mick Jagger and Warren Beatty became regular visitors, and Benton even helped design and decorate parts of the house to match her tastes. Their relationship lasted until 1976, but Hefner's constant affairs with other women ultimately led to their breakup. Despite the painful ending, Benton later said those years with Hefner were actually the best and most exciting years of her entire life. The relationship showed both the glamorous appeal and the ultimate emptiness of Hefner's lifestyle. Even women who genuinely cared about him couldn't compete with his need for constant variety and new experiences. In March 1985, when Hefner was 59 years old, he suffered a serious stroke that dramatically changed his life and forced him to confront his mortality. The stroke left him partially paralyzed for several months and made him reconsider many aspects of his extreme lifestyle. 4 years later, in 1989, he decided to marry again, this time to Kimberly Conrad, a 26-year-old playmate whom he had met during her photo shoot in 1987. She had been named Playmate of the Year in 1989, and they had 2 sons together, Marston, born in 1990, and Cooper, born in 1991. Hefner briefly attempted to slow down his partying lifestyle for the sake of his new family. But by 1998, he and Kimberly were living in separate parts of the mansion. He gradually returned to his old ways of dating multiple women simultaneously while still technically married. Kimberly finally filed for divorce in 2010 after they had been living apart for more than a decade. Hefner later admitted that the marriage had largely been a fearful reaction to the health scare brought on by his stroke, rather than genuine love or commitment. For practical and financial reasons, they remained legally married for many years to benefit their children, and Kimberly even lived in the house next door to the main mansion. In 2012, on New Year's Eve, Hefner married for the third and final time. His bride was Crystal Harris, who was 26 years old while he was 86. They had first met at a Halloween party in 2008, and she had moved into the mansion shortly afterward, but their relationship was far from the fairy tale it appeared to be publicly. Years later, in her revealing 2024 memoir, Krista, Elle described what life with the aging Hefner was actually like behind closed doors. She said she felt constantly trapped and controlled by his increasingly demanding rules and expectations. Hefner dictated what she could wear, how she had to style her hair, what type of nail polish was acceptable, and even monitored her weight obsessively. She wasn't allowed to gain even a few pounds, had to bleach her hair immediately if her roots began to show, and lived under a strict curfew that controlled when she could leave the mansion. Crystal also revealed that their intimate relationship became completely robotic and virtually non-existent after 2014, as Hefner's health continued to decline. The once glamorous mansion had become filled with mold, birds, and massive amounts of junk that Hefner refused to throw away, creating an unhealthy and depressing living environment. Although they had actually called off their wedding once in 2011 due to these problems, they eventually got back together and went through with the marriage ceremony. However, when Hefner finally died in 2017, Crystal discovered that despite years of marriage and devotion, she would inherit absolutely nothing from his estate. This final betrayal revealed the true nature of their relationship and showed a much darker side of Hefner, one focused entirely on control and manipulation rather than genuine love or partnership. The marriage demonstrated how, even in his final years, Hefner continued to use his wealth and power to dominate and control the women in his life. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, several tragic incidents rocked the Playboy world and began to reveal the darker reality behind the glamorous facade. In 1975, Dorothy Stratton, who had just been named Playmate of the Year, was brutally murdered by her jealous, estranged husband when she was only 20 years old. Many people blamed Hefner for putting vulnerable young women in dangerous situations and not protecting them adequately. After Stratton's shocking death, Hefner controversially published nude photographs of her without obtaining permission from her grieving family, leading her mother and sister to file lawsuits against him. Former mansion employees later claimed that Stratton had been sexually assaulted at the mansion before her death, and her boyfriend, director Peter Bogdanovich, wrote an entire book blaming Hefner and the toxic Playboy culture for creating the circumstances that led to her murder. The 1980s brought even more disturbing allegations as multiple women came forward claiming that Hefner had sexually assaulted them at various parties held at the mansion. Some of these women said they had been underage at the time of the alleged assaults, and drugs were frequently involved in these incidents. Years later, Crystal Harris revealed that Hefner had kept thousands of compromising photographs of women stored in the mansion's basement, and she claimed to have destroyed many of them after his death to protect the victim's privacy. One of Hefner's former valets provided testimony claiming that Hefner had once sexually assaulted a young woman while she was unconscious and unable to consent. Twin sisters who had lived at the mansion for an extended period said that Hefner consistently refused to use protection during intimate encounters, and that he had left one of them pregnant. These revelations transformed public perception of the mansion from a glamorous party destination into a place where vulnerable women had experienced serious trauma and abuse. After Hefner's death in 2017, the legal consequences of his alleged crimes began to unfold. By 2022, more than 10 separate lawsuits had been filed by women claiming they had been victims of assault, secret recording, and other forms of abuse at the Playboy Mansion. Many of these cases involved women who discovered years later that they had been secretly filmed during intimate moments without their knowledge or consent. The basement vaults of the Playboy Mansion contained more than 1,000 hours of footage, with some recordings dating back as far as 1979. These tapes allegedly included compromising material involving both unknown women and major celebrities who had attended parties at the mansion. Most of these lawsuits were eventually settled out of court with confidential financial agreements, preventing the full extent of the abuse from becoming public knowledge. The story of Hugh Hefner reveals how a man who presented himself as a champion of sexual freedom actually created a system of control, manipulation, and abuse that harmed countless women over several decades. While he successfully built a media empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars and became a cultural icon, the true cost of his success was measured in the suffering of the vulnerable women who trusted him and found themselves trapped in his world of exploitation and secrecy.